This video will show you how I made this head wrap that I use when I'm welding, but that's not really what the video is about. This video is more about sharing some techniques for disassembling an existing item so that you can make a pattern and make your own version of that item with repeatable results. Stay tuned. By day I work as a welder, and being someone who is follically challenged, I like to wear a head wrap underneath my welding hood just for a little bit more comfort and to keep from getting the unsightly crease in my forehead that I get when I don't wear one. And being someone who likes to sew, I make my own. If you are a welder and you want to make one of these, I just want to give a word of caution. I'm a strictly TIG welder working on a bench, and with TIG welding there's very few sparks, so I don't have to worry about this being a flame retardant material. If you're doing a lot of overhead stick or MIG welding or something and you want to make something like this, make sure you find flame retardant material so you don't set your head on fire. There's a couple of ways that you can take measurements of an existing item in order to replicate it. One way to do it is to identify the individual pieces, take your measurements from seam to seam, and then add in the amount of seam allowance you need for the kind of seam that you're going to be making. A more accurate way, if you don't care about destroying the item that you're trying to replicate, would be to seam rip it apart and then measure the actual pieces so that you include the seam allowances. And that's what I'm going to do with this one since it's clearly done. So the simplest way to do this, but perhaps the most time-consuming, would be to take the entire head wrap apart. But to save myself a little bit of time, I've taken one side off and the other side's identical, so I can just use this one to make the pattern for both sides. And then the center panel, to which the other side is still attached, I can use the center panel to make a pattern by marking one side and then marking the center and flipping it over, making the other side. And that'll be faster than seam ripping out the other panel. If that's confusing to you, just rip it all apart if you're trying to duplicate something like this. I'm using these industrial fabric pattern weights. If you don't have something like this, you know, some large washers or lead diving weights or anything like that might be helpful to hold your fabric down on your patterning material so that you can make your lines as accurate as possible. For the head strap, so I don't have to have a cardboard piece that's 4 feet long or whatever this actually is when it's all stretched out, I'm going to fold it in half, and I'll make a note on the cardboard to fold the fabric in half when I cut it, so that the next time I make one I can remember to do that and it'll be the right length. Now I can cut out my pattern pieces. For my patterns, I'm using a product called Ram Board. It's a floor protector that you can buy at your home improvement store that I frequently use for patterns. By noting the location of the holes where the original stitching was on this piece, I will note on my pattern how much of a seam allowance I need to leave. Now I can use my patterns to mark out my fabric and cut the pieces out. To make the strap that wraps the head wrap around my head, I doubled the fabric over, and because of the length and width of the piece that I have of this fabric at the moment, the only way I could do that and get sufficient length out of one piece was to fold the fabric in like a triangle like this. And it's, I'm going to be cutting a big piece right out of the middle of the fabric. It's not really the most efficient way to use the fabric, but I'd rather do this than have a seam in the middle of my forehead. So that's what I'm going to do. Just know though that this is not the most efficient way to do this. But you can talk. What's up?
Nothing. I was going to eat my lunch. I'm looking for my earrings.
Nice. Great.
I know. Yeah.
Very nice. By referring to my pattern pieces, I know that I want to sew the center piece to the side piece with a 2 centimeter seam allowance, and that will allow enough material for a finished seam. So that's what I'll do now. You also need to put the right sides together for this to go right. So I'm going to seam rip this and do it again. Hooray. One thing I rarely do with the kinds of sewing I typically do is iron or press anything. But in this case, this is basically a garment fabric, and in order to get the part that wraps around my head more or less perfectly folded in half with a crisp edge, I'm going to press it before I sew it. And since I typically prefer old things, I'm going to use my, I think it's maybe 1950s era little travel iron. This was invented before lawsuits apparently, because if you touch anything but the handle, it'll burn you very badly. But it works really well. Now that I've established some patterns for this head wrap, I can make as many as I want to in the future as I wear them out, or if I want to choose a different fabric, make one for a coworker or whatever. Speaking of fabric, if you're wondering why the goofy money fabric, I have to wake up at 4:30 in the morning to go to work, and sometimes I need a reminder of why I do it. This helps. If you like this video, I hope you give me a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.